My brother changed our father's will and gave the entire inheritance to me, but I found out that the inheritance was 4 times bigger, and he took the rest of the money for himself. I'm Mark. I'm 34, an electrical technician from Georgia. I'm not the kind of guy who usually posts on Reddit, but this whole thing has been eating at me for weeks now, and I just need to get it out. Maybe writing it all down will help me make sense of it. My dad died 3 weeks ago. We weren't exactly close in the last few years, more like distant and polite, like we were both just playing our roles when we talked. He was a hard man, very no-nonsense, the kind of guy who thought respect meant obedience. Our relationship was never abusive, nothing dramatic, just cold. I moved out when I was 22, took a job out of state, and we never really reconnected. He didn't come to my wedding. I didn't call on his birthdays. That kind of thing. Still, when my mom called to tell me he'd passed, I booked a flight back home without thinking twice. He was my dad. Regardless of everything, you show up. My older brother Rick met me at the airport. Rick's always been the golden child. Tall, charming, great teeth, never got his hands dirty a day in his life. He's a lawyer now, some big-name firm in Atlanta, and every time I talk to him it's like he's selling me something. But he was polite, warm even, hugged me like nothing had changed between us. He said, "Everything's taken care of, little brother. Just focus on saying goodbye." And at first, it really did look like he meant it. He had everything organized down to the hour. The service was in this classy little funeral home, the kind with soft piano music and lemon-scented air. Dad had already been cremated, which surprised me, but Rick said it was Dad's wish, something about not wanting people staring at his dead face. Seemed in character, so I didn't push. The dinner afterward was held at a restaurant downtown. It was tasteful, nothing flashy, steak and wine, mostly our family and a few of Dad's old coworkers. Rick gave a speech. I didn't expect it to hit me like it did, but when he talked about Dad teaching him to drive stick on the old Ford Ranger, I remembered sitting in the back seat watching the gear shift like it was some kind of magic trick. I excused myself to the bathroom to pull myself together. It wasn't until the next day that the cracks started showing. We met at the house, our childhood home, the one Rick technically owned now, though he never lived there after college. He said we needed to go over some things. Nothing major, just paperwork. We sat in Dad's old office. It still smelled like cigar smoke and old coffee grounds. Rick had a folder on the desk, all neat and highlighted, like he was ready for court. He cleared his throat and said, "So, about the will." I said, "Yeah." And he just looked at me with this fake sincere expression and said, "Dad changed it a few months ago. Left everything to me." I blinked. "Everything?" Rick nodded. "Yeah. The house, the savings, the stocks, the truck." Said he trusted me to handle things. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Rick had always been full of jokes, but his expression didn't change. My stomach dropped. "You mean he didn't leave me anything?" I asked. He sighed like this was hard for him. "It's not about that. You know Dad. He didn't believe in splitting things evenly just for the sake of it. He said I was the responsible one." That hit harder than I expected. I asked if I could see the documents, and Rick handed them over like he was handing me a menu. Everything looked legit. Signed, notarized, dated 6 months ago. Just his name on every single line. I wanted to scream. I wanted to accuse him of something. Foul play, manipulation, fraud, but I couldn't prove anything. And Rick knew that. He leaned back in Dad's leather chair like he owned the whole damn world. "I'll make sure Mom's taken care of," he said, like that made it better. "And if you need help, I'm here." I didn't respond. I just stood up, left the office, and went to sit in the backyard for a while. That yard used to feel huge when I was a kid. I remembered playing baseball back there with Rick, chasing fireflies in the summer. Now it just felt small, boxed in by fences and resentment. I flew back to Georgia the next morning. Rick didn't even drive me to the airport, just sent me a text. "Safe travels, bro." I haven't answered him since. I couldn't stop thinking about the will. Something about it gnawed at me from the moment Rick handed me the folder. I kept turning our last few conversations with Dad over in my head, trying to make sense of it. The man wasn't warm or affectionate, but he had always been strict about fairness. One of the few things he ever said that stuck with me was that he didn't believe in playing favorites, that you raise your sons the same and let them earn the rest on their own. He used to say that a good man leaves the world in order, not chaos. That didn't line up with what Rick was claiming. On the flight back to Georgia, I kept staring at the clouds out the window and replaying the moment Rick said Dad had changed the will 6 months ago. I remember trying to call Dad a few times around that period, and he hadn't picked up. I figured at the time he was just being his usual self, keeping his distance, but now I wasn't so sure. Something wasn't adding up. When I got back home, I let a couple days pass before I reached out to anyone. I needed to sit with the anger before I started asking questions. It was Thursday when I finally called Kendra, our cousin on my dad's side. She and I had been close growing up, and though we hadn't talked much lately, I figured if anyone knew what had been going on with my dad in those final weeks, it would be her. She picked up on the second ring and sounded surprised to hear from me, but warm. After the usual sorry for your loss, how are you doing kind of talk, I asked her point blank if she had seen much of Dad before he passed. Oh yeah, she said. I stopped by a few times in August and September. He wasn't doing well. I thought someone would have told you. He could barely get a sentence out the last time I saw him. My stomach tightened. He was that bad. Yeah. His speech was all over the place. Like, slurred and mumbled. Some days he couldn't get more than a few words out at all. I don't know if it was the medication or what, but he was definitely out of it. I was quiet for a second, just letting that settle in. Why are you asking, she said. I took a breath. Rick says Dad changed the will 6 months ago. Signed everything over to him. Says Dad wanted it that way. Kendra made a noise on the other end of the line, like a mix between a laugh and a scoff. 6 months ago? That would have been around the time he stopped answering my calls. I didn't even know he could still write at that point. Are you sure about the date? I saw the paperwork, I said. Dated exactly 6 months ago. April. Mark, I don't know, she said. That just doesn't sound right. When I saw him in May, he couldn't even hold a coffee mug. I'm not saying he was completely gone, but lucid enough to make legal decisions? I don't think so. That was the moment the doubt really kicked in. It wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. Something wasn't right. My father, the man who once lectured me for borrowing a wrench without putting it back in the exact same drawer, supposedly rewrote his entire will while he could barely speak or hold a cup. The next day I called Rick. I told myself I'd stay calm, just ask questions, not accuse. He picked up with his usual lawyerly charm, like nothing was wrong. Hey, little bro. Everything good. I've been thinking about the will, I said, and about what Dad actually wanted. There was a pause. Okay, what about it? You said he changed it in April. That's right. But that was right when he got sick, wasn't it? Rick let out a slow sigh. Mark, I know this is hard, but I handled everything by the book. Dad made the decision. He signed it in front of a notary. The witnesses were there. It's airtight. Even though he could barely talk, he wasn't that bad yet, Rick said quickly. He had a few good days, and we took care of it then. I have everything documented. I didn't believe him. Maybe it was the way he rushed the explanation, or maybe it was because I knew him too well. Rick had always been smooth, always knew exactly how to sound convincing even when he was full of it. It was his job, after all. Did he tell you why he left me out? I asked. He didn't leave you out, Rick said, trying to sound soothing. He just left things in my name because he thought it would be simpler. I'm the executor, that's all. That's not what you said before. You said he left everything to you because he trusted you more. Another pause. Then Rick said, same idea. It wasn't. It wasn't the same at all. I got off the phone not long after that, my head buzzing. I didn't have proof. Not yet. But I knew in my gut that something wasn't right. This wasn't just Dad changing his mind. This felt orchestrated. Rick had always been good at taking charge, at making decisions sound like they were someone else's idea. But this time, the timing didn't make sense. The details didn't add up. And if there's one thing Dad hated, it was a messy story with missing pieces. I couldn't let it go. Every time I tried to move on, the pieces kept rattling around in my head like loose bolts in an engine. I wasn't even sleeping right anymore. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me, thinking about my dad, thinking about Rick, thinking about the will and how nothing about it felt like my father. So I started digging. I went back through every email, every voicemail, even the scribbled notes Dad used to leave on yellow legal pads whenever we talked business. I checked the timestamps on old text messages. I found one from February where he said, "Don't worry, when the time comes, you and Rick will get equal parts." It wasn't much, just one line, but it was something. And it matched everything he'd always told us growing up. I remember Dad had a notary friend, a guy named Dennis. They met at some Kiwanis Club event years ago and had been friendly ever since. I hadn't seen Dennis in years, but I knew he lived on the east side of town, ran a tiny office out of a strip mall near the DMV. I drove over one afternoon and just walked in. He was sitting behind a cluttered desk, flipping through a stack of manila folders. Looked up at me over his glasses like he half recognized me. "Mark," he said, tilting his head. I nodded. "Hey, Dennis. I was wondering if we could talk." He looked nervous right away. Before I even said anything else, he pushed back from the desk and stood up. "If this is about your father's will, I really can't get involved." I told him I wasn't looking for trouble. I just had questions. I told him something about what Rick had shown me didn't sit right, and I was just trying to understand what had actually happened. After a long pause, he gestured for me to sit down. "I can't say much," he said, "but I will tell you this. I witnessed an earlier version of your father's will about a year ago. He brought it to me personally. It clearly stated that his estate would be divided equally between you and Rick. No ambiguity, no special trusts, nothing fancy. Just 50-50. My heart was pounding. And what happened to that document? Dennis shook his head. It should be in the registry archive. I filed it myself. But when I checked, because I was curious, same as you, it was gone. Not misfiled. Gone. Like it was never there. I leaned forward. Could someone have taken it out? He didn't answer right away. Just sighed and rubbed his face with both hands. Mark, I'm sorry. I really am. But if I accuse someone of tampering with state-registered legal documents, and I can't prove it, I could lose my license. I've got 3 more years until retirement, and I'm not risking everything over this. You understand? I nodded. I didn't like it, but I understood. Dennis wasn't the kind of man to rock the boat. I thanked him for telling me what he could and left. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station and sat in the car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. My dad had written that will. Dennis had seen it, and now it was gone. Somehow, somewhere between him signing it and his death, that document had vanished. And in its place, Rick had shown up with a new version that just happened to give him everything. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Back at home, I started looking through my father's financials. I still had access to some of the shared statements because my name was on a couple of the older utility accounts he'd never removed me from. From there, I was able to request more documents, some of which came automatically to the shared online portal Dad had used for years. That's when I found the withdrawals. 3 separate transactions, all within 10 days after my father's death. One for $25,000, another for $50,000. The third was a full $100,000, transferred to a brokerage account I didn't recognize. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw the dates. My dad had already been cremated. The death certificate was issued, but the money was still moving. I called the bank. The rep was polite, overly so, but wouldn't give me any information without documentation proving I was the executor or a direct beneficiary, which, according to Rick's version of the will, I wasn't. I hung up and just stared at the wall for a while. That money should have been frozen. There should have been probate. There should have been a damn process. Instead, Rick was liquidating assets like the estate was already settled. And the worst part was, unless I could prove otherwise, he was technically allowed to. As far as the law was concerned, he was the sole inheritor. And I was just the other son, the one who got nothing. I knew I was onto something, but I still didn't have anything solid enough to bring to court. Every time I replayed the timeline, it felt more like a setup, like Rick had planned all of this long before Dad took his last breath. But assumptions don't hold up against notarized documents and polished legal language, and Rick had made sure to cover his tracks just enough to keep everything looking clean. Then, one evening, I got a message from an old friend of mine named Bryce. We went to tech school together years ago and stayed loosely in touch. He now worked as an analyst at a regional branch of one of the banks my dad had used. I hadn't told him much, just that there was something fishy going on with my father's accounts and that I was trying to understand what happened. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a pointer in the right direction or a dead-end response like everyone else. But Bryce came through. He texted me and asked if I could talk, and we got on the phone that night. His tone was careful, measured, like he was walking a tightrope. "I'm not supposed to be showing you this," he said. "And if you mention my name, I'll deny everything. But you need to see what I found." He sent me a redacted PDF a few minutes later. No logos, no letterhead, just raw transaction data from one of Dad's accounts, with the access activity and outgoing transfers from the weeks after his death. It was all there, the 3 major withdrawals I'd already spotted, but now with an additional layer of detail. The final line made my blood run cold. $119,600 transferred to an international account in the Cayman Islands. Account holder, R. K. Sullivan. Rick's initials. His wife Karen's last name. I stared at the screen, not even blinking, as the weight of it all settled in. This wasn't just about Rick inheriting more than he deserved. This was theft. This was a calculated move, probably months in the making, and now I had proof that he was funneling money out of my father's estate before the ink was even dry on the death certificate. I sat there for maybe half an hour, trying to breathe through the adrenaline. Then I opened a new browser tab and started looking for an attorney. It took a few calls, but eventually I got in touch with someone who didn't brush me off, Jennifer Rowe, an estate and fraud lawyer based in Savannah. I sent her everything I had. The scanned statement Bryce gave me, the old text from Dad promising an even split, my notes from the conversation with Dennis. She didn't say much during our initial consultation, but by the end of the call, her voice had sharpened. "This looks bad," she said. "Really bad, for your brother." I signed a retainer the next day. Jennifer filed a formal complaint with the probate court on my behalf. We included a request to challenge the legitimacy of the will, citing questions around my father's mental and physical capacity at the time of the amendment. We also filed a separate fraud report outlining the offshore transaction and requesting an injunction to freeze any remaining assets associated with the estate until an investigation could be completed. The process was slow, but the wheels started turning. Letters were sent. Deadlines were issued. Rick's attorneys would be contacted. The court would start looking into the documents and accounts. And for the first time since I walked into my father's funeral and felt like something was just a little bit off, I wasn't just asking questions anymore. I was fighting back. The night I drove over to my mother's place, I already knew how it was going to play out. I rehearsed what I was going to say a dozen times in my head on the way there. But the truth is, nothing really prepares you for that kind of conversation. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, and the closer I got, the heavier my chest felt. I didn't want a scene, but after what I'd uncovered, I couldn't stay quiet. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Rick's black SUV parked out front. The same one Dad used to complain about, said it was too flashy, unnecessary. Lights were on inside, and through the front window, I could see Rick laughing with a glass of wine in his hand. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like someone who wasn't worried about a thing. I rang the doorbell instead of walking in. My mom answered and smiled when she saw me. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping much. Her smile faded a little when she saw the expression on my face. "Everything okay?" she asked. "I need to talk to Rick," I said. "Privately." She hesitated, like she already knew this wasn't going to be a casual drop-in. "He's setting the table," she said. "We're doing dinner tonight, just the three of us. I won't stay long." She stepped aside and let me in. The house smelled like rosemary chicken, same as it always did when Mom was trying to make things feel normal. Rick was in the dining room lighting candles, humming some tune under his breath. When he saw me, his face froze for half a second, then the usual smirk kicked in. "Well, look who decided to drop by," he said. "You here for dinner or to serve subpoenas? Can we talk?" I said, keeping my voice low. He glanced toward the kitchen, then walked past me and into the hallway. I followed him to the den, where Dad used to read the newspaper in the mornings. Rick shut the door behind us. "All right," he said. "Let me guess. You've got a theory about the money now, too." I pulled the printed transaction report from my coat pocket and held it out. "I have more than a theory. Offshore transfer. $119,600. To an account in the Caymans. Registered to R.K. Sullivan." He didn't take the paper, just smiled like I was showing him a joke he'd already heard. "You're grasping at straws, Mark. You think that's what this is? I think you're grieving, and it's making you paranoid. Dad trusted me to handle things. That's what I've been doing. All this," he gestured at the paper in my hand, "it's just noise. None of it will hold up. You're stealing from our father's estate." Rick's expression darkened. "Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll forge another will." That got a reaction. Just a flicker, but I saw it. His jaw clenched for a second before he caught himself. Then he laughed, cold, calculated. "This is pathetic. You come in here, waving half-baked conspiracy theories, thinking you're some kind of detective. Let me make this simple for you. Keep the garbage out of this house. Mom doesn't need this, and I'm not going to entertain your nonsense during dinner." "She doesn't know, does she?" I said. "You told her you were helping with paperwork." "That's it." Rick didn't answer. He just stepped past me and opened the door. We both turned when we heard Mom's voice from the hallway. "What are you two doing in there?" She was standing by the archway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes moved between us, then landed on the paper I was still holding. "Mom," I said, "you should see this." She didn't take the paper either, just shook her head, slowly, like the air had left the room. "I don't want to get involved in whatever this is. I thought Rick was helping with the estate. That's all. That's what he told me." I looked at her and said, "He wasn't helping. He was taking." Rick cut in before I could say more. "Don't do this," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "Don't drag Mom into it. If you've got a problem, handle it through the courts. But don't bring it in here. Don't tear the family apart over something you think might have happened." Mom stepped back like we'd both shouted at her. "Please," she said. "Please don't do this now. I just want one evening. One dinner without tension. Can't we have that?" I didn't say anything. I just stood there, holding the evidence that proved my brother was a liar and a thief, while my mother asked me not to ruin the peace that had never really been there to begin with. Rick straightened his shirt cuffs, looked at me one last time, and walked past her into the kitchen like nothing had happened. And I turned and left. The day the lawsuit was officially filed, everything changed. Up until that point, it had all felt like theory and tension, paperwork and suspicion, like I was circling something just out of reach. But once Jennifer submitted the documents to the probate court and served Rick through his firm's legal department, the weight of it all became terrifyingly real. The complaint listed everything: forgery, estate fraud, misappropriation of funds, and a formal request for the exhumation of my father's body to support claims that he may not have been medically competent to authorize any legal documents during his final weeks. That last part wasn't easy. I'd argued with Jennifer about it, Told her I didn't want to go that far. But she was right. If there was any chance of proving diminished capacity or influence, we needed every piece of evidence available. And that included toxicology and medical assessments that couldn't be faked or spun by Rick's legal jargon. I signed the papers with shaking hands, knowing that if this went forward, there was no turning back. We weren't just questioning a document anymore. We were tearing into everything my family had pretended was stable. Within days, I started hearing the fallout. Rick's name hit the local legal circuit like a thunderclap. He wasn't just some small-town attorney. He had built a reputation as a shrewd, high-performing partner at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta. He dealt in corporate law mostly, but he was known for his courtroom presence, his polished arguments, and his carefully maintained image. And now, all of it was unraveling. The court summons became public record. Someone from the legal community leaked the details, and within a week, his firm was under internal review. I heard from a mutual acquaintance, another lawyer we both knew from high school, who told me that Rick had been pulled into a closed-door meeting with senior partners. The firm was scrambling to distance itself from the case. They issued a statement saying they were committed to the highest ethical standards and would fully cooperate with any investigation. Clients started dropping him. 3, maybe 4 big accounts, gone in less than 2 weeks. Rick's name disappeared from the firm's website homepage. I saw a screenshot on a legal blog where he'd been scrubbed from the partner list, like he'd never existed. No official announcement, no press release, just silence. And through all of it, I kept waiting for the blowback. Because the truth is, even though I knew I was doing the right thing, there was still this part of me, this anxious, twitching part, that kept wondering if I'd gone too far. The lawsuit wasn't just a strike against Rick. It was a wrecking ball through our entire family structure. I kept thinking about Mom, about how she looked at me like I was the one dragging this mess through her living room. She hadn't called since the night I left her house. Neither had anyone else in the family. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't unsee the transfers. I couldn't pretend that it was just a misunderstanding or that Dad suddenly decided to leave everything to Rick out of some newfound trust. Rick didn't just abuse that trust. He weaponized it. The anxiety hit hard during those first few weeks. I barely ate. I couldn't focus at work. I'd find myself staring out the window at nothing for long stretches, mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if the court sided with Rick anyway? What if the exhumation didn't prove anything? What if Rick countersued? Jennifer kept me grounded. She walked me through each step, made sure I understood the timeline and the weight of every document we submitted. But even she admitted the case was going to be brutal. Rick had money, connections, and every incentive to fight tooth and nail. But the more he resisted, the more suspicious it looked. The firm investigating him was reportedly already turning up inconsistencies in other areas. Nothing explosive yet, but enough to slow him down. For the first time in my life, Rick wasn't in control. And he hated it. I got a text from an unknown number a few nights after the story leaked. It just said, "You're making a huge mistake." I knew it was him. I didn't respond. I just blocked the number and moved on. The silence from the rest of the family hurt more than I expected. No one called to ask what was happening. No one asked to hear my side. They just disappeared into the background, like I was the one who had violated some unspoken code by not keeping quiet. But I'd made my choice. I wasn't going to be silent. Not anymore. The call came late at night. One of those quiet hours when everything is still and you can hear the hum of the fridge in the next room. I almost didn't answer when I saw Rick's name on the screen. Part of me thought he'd try something. Maybe a last-minute bluff or some arrogant attempt to rattle me before the hearing. But nothing prepared me for what I actually heard when I picked up. He was crying. Not the fake kind, not performative. His voice cracked right away, like he'd already been on the edge and just needed someone to hear him fall apart. He didn't even say hello, just went straight into it. "Mark, I screwed up," he said. "I messed up so bad, man. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I didn't say anything. I just listened. He kept going. Said he never wanted to hurt anyone, that he was just trying to stay afloat, that the firm was bleeding him out, that he'd leveraged more than he could handle trying to keep up appearances. Said Karen had no idea how bad things were, and that the money was just supposed to be temporary. A bridge. Something he could pay back once he figured things out. I stayed silent. He started begging then. "I'll make it right," he said. "I'll pay you back every cent. I'll split everything. Assets, investments, whatever you want. I just need this lawsuit to go away." My chest tightened when he said that. Not because I felt sorry for him, though there was still a part of me, buried deep, that hated hearing my brother like this, but because I realized in that moment how desperate he truly was. He wasn't apologizing because he regretted what he did. He was panicking because he got caught. "You want to settle?" I said quietly. "I'll sign whatever you want," he said. "Just, please, Mark. I'm done. I can't lose everything. You don't understand what it's been like. The firm dropped me. Karen's talking about leaving. I'm in over my head. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the wall. You had every chance to do the right thing, I said. You looked me in the face at Dad's funeral and lied. You sat in his office and said he changed the will because he trusted you more. You stood there and watched me walk away with nothing. I know, he said, sobbing now. I was scared. I was drowning. I didn't know what else to do. You stole from him, Rick. Our father. While he was dying. There was silence on the other end of the line. Just the sound of him trying to breathe. I can't make this go away for you, I said finally. You did this. And now you get to face it. He didn't reply. I hung up. The courthouse felt colder than I expected. Not just from the air conditioning, but from the weight of it all. The polished floors, the echo of shoes against tile, the quiet murmurs of people waiting for their names to be called. It all felt surreal. I sat beside Jennifer at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. Rick was across the aisle with his lawyer, looking thinner than I remembered, his tie slightly askew, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't look at me once. The hearing was already tense. Jennifer laid out our claims calmly but firmly, pointing to the inconsistencies in the dates, the suspicious withdrawals, the disappearance of the original will. She presented the offshore account records with Rick and Karen's names on them. Rick's attorney objected at every turn, claiming circumstantial evidence, misunderstanding, family grief. But it was clear the courtroom wasn't buying it. The judge was attentive, sharp, asked precise questions, and made detailed notes as Jennifer walked him through each point. And then came the moment no one expected. Jennifer stood and announced that we had one more witness. Dennis walked into the courtroom slowly, his expression tense but resolute. I hadn't seen him since that day in his office, and I honestly didn't think he would show. But there he was, wearing a slightly wrinkled blazer and holding a folder under one arm. The clerk swore him in, and for a moment the whole room went still. Under oath, Dennis spoke clearly. He confirmed he had notarized the original will a year before Dad's death. He described it in detail, how Dad had come to him personally, how he had signed it in full health, and how the will had included equal division between Rick and me. Jennifer asked if that version of the will had been officially filed. Yes, Dennis said. I filed it myself into the registry archive. And what happened to it? She asked. Dennis swallowed hard. It disappeared. After I was pressured to make sure it did. A ripple went through the courtroom. Rick's attorney stood immediately, objecting, but the judge waved it off. Who pressured you? Jennifer asked. Dennis didn't even hesitate. Rick Sullivan, he said. He came to me after your father's health declined. He said he needed to make some adjustments, that it would be easier for the family if things were kept in one name. I told him I couldn't help. That's when he threatened me. Threatened how? The judge asked, cutting in now. Dennis shifted slightly. He brought up a disciplinary warning I received 20 years ago. It was resolved, but it's still in the system. He said if I didn't cooperate, if I didn't lose the original will and keep quiet, he'd make sure I was disbarred and publicly humiliated. Rick jumped to his feet. That's a lie, he shouted. He's making this up, all of it. The bailiff immediately stepped between him and the bench, but Rick wasn't done. He's lying under oath. He's covering for his own mistakes. The judge banged his gavel once hard. Mr. Sullivan, sit down and be quiet, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Rick's lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him down, hissing something in his ear. Rick was still shaking, glaring at Dennis like he wanted to leap across the room. The judge turned to the clerk. Prepare an order to freeze all assets under Mr. Sullivan's name, effective immediately. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there watching it happen. Years of manipulation, lies, and entitlement caught up with Rick in a single moment of truth. And for the first time since this entire mess began, I finally felt the weight begin to lift. It started with a phone call from Jennifer just 2 days after the hearing. I could tell from her voice the moment she spoke that something major had shifted. She told me the district attorney's office had officially opened a criminal investigation against Rick. What began as a civil matter was now moving into something far more serious. Fraud, document tampering, and financial misappropriation were just the start. The bigger issue, she explained, was what Dennis had said under oath, how Rick had manipulated legal records and coerced a notary. That opened the door to re-examining every legal document Rick had ever touched. The prosecutor's office was already digging through his old casework. According to Jennifer, they were looking for patterns, any indication that the forged will wasn't an isolated act. It didn't take long. Within a week, the press got hold of a sealed court motion showing that at least 2 previous property settlements Rick had overseen were now under review. Both involved unusually sudden beneficiary changes filed just before a client's death. Both bore Rick's signature, and both looked eerily familiar. The headline broke on a Tuesday morning. I woke up to it flashing across my phone. Attorney under investigation for alleged will forgery faces criminal charges. His name was right there in bold print, his firm's logo blurred in the background. They used an old photo from a charity event, back when Rick was still one of those clean-cut, confident faces that made people trust their paperwork without thinking twice. By the end of that week, the investigation expanded. The state bar opened its own inquiry. His license was suspended pending review. The DA's office confirmed they were preparing to bring charges not just for forgery and fraud, but for obstruction of justice and unlawful practice involving falsified legal documents. One of the assistant prosecutors announced during a press briefing that Rick Sullivan could be facing up to 5 years in prison if convicted. I sat on the edge of my bed with the TV on mute, watching the footage roll, unable to look away. It was surreal seeing my brother's face on the screen while reporters stood outside the courthouse, listing the charges one after another. For a long time, I just stared at the image. Not out of satisfaction or anger, just disbelief. He had built his entire life around the illusion of order and control, and now that illusion was unraveling in public, one thread at a time. People from our old neighborhood started reaching out. Some were curious, some just nosy. Others quietly admitted they had always found Rick too slick, too good at dodging direct answers. A few even wondered if they should revisit their own paperwork, just in case. But through all of it, I never felt triumphant. What I felt was exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones when the truth finally comes out, but leaves behind a kind of sadness that no amount of justice can really fix. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about family, about the kind of damage that doesn't show up in court records but stays with you anyway. And now, Rick would have to face it all, not in silence, not behind closed doors, but in front of a judge, under oath, just like the rest of us. It was a few weeks after the ruling when my mother finally called. Her voice was tired, softer than I remembered, like something in her had gone quiet and wasn't coming back. She asked if I could come by, just to talk. I almost didn't go. After everything that had happened, the silence between us had felt like a natural ending. But some part of me still wanted to hear what she had to say. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than it used to. The flower beds were overgrown, the paint on the shutters was peeling, and the porch light flickered like it hadn't been changed in months. I knocked once and walked in. She was sitting in Dad's old armchair, the one he used to fall asleep in during Sunday football games, a cup of tea resting untouched on the side table. She didn't waste time. "I know what he did was wrong," she said, looking up at me with a heaviness in her eyes. "But he's still your brother. You grew up together. You shared everything. Can't you find a way to forgive him?" I stood there for a moment, staring at the floor, then looked her in the eyes. "I'm not doing this out of revenge," I said. "I'm protecting Dad's memory. Everything Rick did, he did while Dad was dying. He manipulated him, lied about him, and tore apart the one thing Dad always cared about, fairness. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy seeing my brother lose everything?" She blinked hard, her hands gripping the edge of the chair. "He said he was scared, that he didn't know how else to fix things. He had choices," I said. "He made his." She looked away then, her gaze falling on a photo on the wall, one of those old family portraits we took when I was about 12. Back when things were still simple. Back when she could sit in the middle, arms around both of us, smiling like the world was balanced. "He's gone, Mark," she said quietly. "He won't talk to me anymore. After the trial, he packed what he had left and said he didn't want to hear from me. Said I chose the wrong son." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent months building my case, digging through files, reliving every betrayal, and now here I was, facing the only person left who still wanted to pretend that forgiveness might be enough to undo it all. "I didn't choose this either," I finally said. "But I'm not going to pretend like none of it happened just so we can all sit around a table and pretend we're still a family." She nodded slowly, her mouth tightening like she was trying to hold in words that might shatter her. When I turned to leave, she didn't stop me. That was the last time I saw her. In the end, she was left alone in that house, the one Dad had spent his life working for, the one Rick tried to claim, and the one I had to fight to protect. Neither of us wanted to go back, not after what it became. A place full of silences and ghosts. And whatever part of her still hoped we could go back to the way things were, I think she finally understood that we couldn't. I never expected any of this. Not the trial, not the investigation, not the way my family came apart in slow motion. But after the ruling, after Rick lost everything and my mother chose silence over truth, I realized I couldn't just walk away and pretend like this was over. What happened to me, to my father's legacy, wasn't rare. It was just quiet, buried behind closed doors and family dinners, hidden beneath the fear of confrontation. People don't talk about it because it's messy, because it hurts, because no one wants to admit that betrayal can come from the people who share your blood. So I made a decision. I used part of my settlement to buy a small house near the Gulf Coast in Florida. Nothing flashy, Just a two-bedroom with a screened-in porch and enough room for peace. I needed that more than anything. Somewhere I could breathe, work with my hands again, fix things around the house instead of unraveling documents and testimony. But I also knew I couldn't stay silent. I took the rest of the money and started a nonprofit foundation in my father's name, the James Sullivan Trust Initiative. Its mission is simple: help victims of family fraud navigate the legal system, access resources, and reclaim what was taken from them. I reached out to lawyers, financial advisors, grief counselors. I built it piece by piece with the same stubborn determination that got me through the trial. People started finding us. First a few emails, then phone calls, then stories that sounded too familiar to ignore. I posted the full story on Reddit one evening, unsure if anyone would even care. I just wanted it out there. I wrote everything, from the funeral to the courtroom, from Rick's betrayal to my mother's silence. And somehow, it exploded. Thousands of upvotes, comments from people all over the country. Some shared their own stories. Some just offered words I didn't know I needed to hear. The post went viral. News outlets picked it up. A podcast reached out. Donations started coming in. And just like that, the foundation grew beyond anything I ever imagined. Now we're a national initiative. We have volunteers in 6 states. We've helped dozens of families file claims, locate missing documents, and take back what was stolen from them. We've testified before probate reform committees. We've started something that, for once, doesn't end in silence. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoring something that should have never been broken in the first place. I protected my father's memory. I made sure his voice wasn't buried under someone else's greed. And I found something bigger than revenge. I found purpose. Thanks for reading all of this. I know it's a lot. I'm curious. Have you been through anything like this? Have you ever seen family lines blurred by money or power or fear? What would you have done in my place? And what do you think makes justice feel real, even when the damage is already done? I'd really like to hear your thoughts.